Welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays, the Consciousness Cafe with Soul Call Ministries. Today I am so pleased to be with Nadine Smith, who is currently the Executive Director of Equality Florida and has been an activist for all of her life, as far as I can tell. And she is an award-winning leader. I have had the opportunity of working with her in rooms and seeing her among many other leaders and watch her, now that we're in the same community, actually lead from the front, right where we are in St. Petersburg, Florida. So she is a delight, and we are so grateful that she's here with us this morning. So welcome, Nadine.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you inviting me to be part of it.
You're welcome. I see that you're out in nature, which is so beautiful, getting a little bit of rest and
Yes, I'm actually far from our home of St. Petersburg. I am in Vermont, where my in-laws are, and where the COVID-19 virus is not quite the firestorm it is in Florida.
Beautiful. Getting a little rest from that. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to see you taking that kind of rest, because as I've looked at your background, I don't see that many gaps and spaces of a ton of rest. But maybe we can just start with that, a little bit about your calling. I mean, this is Soul Call Ministries, and from what I've observed, and I've got a chance to observe that for more than 15 years now, you have been called as an activist, but maybe that wasn't at the very beginning. When did you first get a calling?
Well, my family has a long history of activism. My grandparents, my grandfather in particular, was a part of the founding of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, which were sharecroppers in Arkansas and Mississippi who were sort of organizing to push back. My grandparents were part of the first integrated farming cooperative in the Mississippi Delta called Hill House. And there's some amazing pictures from Hill House because the same woman, she has three names. She did pictures of Gandhi and did a lot of photos of the rural South. Has pictures of my father as a baby in part of this series she did at Hill House. But it was an experiment, but it was also a place where my grandfather decided to move the family out of the South, because even the best that the South had to offer was not enough. He described a white man coming to the door of his home and asking my father, who was a toddler at the time, where my grandfather was. And he told my grandfather, "You need to teach that boy of yours to show more respect to white people, or he's going to get kicked." My grandfather decided he did not want to kill a man that day, and that he probably needs to get his family out of the South. So coming back to the South and living in the South and organizing in the South, those are the kind of stories that give me the sense of a baton having been handed, and I've got to carry it the distance.
Wow. Okay. And so would you say your family was part of that great migration that we all have read or heard about?
Yeah, some of the family went to Chicago. My grandfather and grandmother moved to New York, upstate, and then Staten Island, where he was a carpenter. And again, an organizer, because out of necessity. If you weren't part of the union and Black people were not allowed in the union, you couldn't get credit on supplies. So you had to front the entire cost of building a house, where your white counterpart could get credit and then get paid and then pay off the. So at every point in his life, he always had to organize around an injustice. And so for us, growing up, those were the stories we heard. His father was shot to death on the steps of his home in Mississippi by a white man who he refused to sell the property to. So these were the stories that we grew up with and understood. And I remember my father telling me, "We don't say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. We don't say yes, sir, and no, sir," as a kid. So going to a small panhandle school in Florida and not saying that was like, in some ways, I'm like, "Thanks, Dad. You just put a big target on my back." But he said, "Be respectful." But we're not using that language because of his experiences in the South. And so I think those things, he was shaping his, Black female daughter to navigate racism, but he was also teaching his, Black lesbian daughter to navigate homophobia and gender-based bigotry as well.
Yes, you are the quintessence, that's the word, of intersectionality, right? I get that sometimes as well. So this activism is in, as you said, it's in your DNA, it's in your family, it's been part of it. And did you actually live in the South your entire life?
Um, my family's military, and I don't know if you can hear the jet going overhead, but
Just a little bit. I can still
no,
hear.
my mother, yeah, my mother, uh, I'm talking about my father, but my mother, talking about scrappy, she was from Liverpool, England, and they met when my father was stationed there. So she moved, as really 17, 18 years old to a whole new country and left all of her family behind. And she, uh, would send money to family. And eventually she became a US citizen. But she was, you know, she was very demure, very calm, but fierce. I remember at Millville Elementary School, they loved to paddle black kids, black boys in particular. And I had dropped my pencil and the lead broke. And the teacher said, "You going outside, you're going to get paddled." And I said, "Nobody hits me but my parents," which is sort of a, we can unpack that later. But he said, "You're going to get paddled or you go home." So I walked, I don't know, 2.5, 3 miles. I bet the mileage gets longer as I get older, home. And so I remember my mom finding, I came through the door in the middle of the afternoon. My mother is shocked to see me and then furious that I've walked all this way. And I remember she got in the car, drove us back to my school, went to the principal's office. I sat down on a little bench outside, and she just walked in. And she didn't cuss, she didn't raise her voice, but that man's hands were shaking when they stepped out of that office. And nobody threatened to hit me ever again. So that's how my mother moved. And I learned a lot from her about the power of having your entire focus and intention set and with an unwillingness to be intimidated by anyone, no matter their title.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And it's one of the things you did with that. I mean, I noticed that there was some time in the Air Force. Were you actually in the Air Force? You went to the Air Force Academy, I
I
think.
went to the Air Force Academy. Yeah, I went to the Air Force Academy out of high school. As many people do, to get a quality education that I didn't think my family was going to be able to afford otherwise. So I say it this way: I was glad I went to the academy. I was glad I went through basic. I was glad I went through the academic year, and I was glad I left because it is a unique experience, and I learned a great deal, including the fact that I did not want to be part of that system.
Yeah.
And this was pre Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This was just, there were a lot of sexual assaults happening. There were a lot of purging of gay cadets. So in some ways, I was fortunate that I was able to leave under my own steam and not in the midst of an anti-gay witch hunt.
Yes. Wow. So the experiences you've had, I mean, they are across the board and they prepared you for this amazing leadership that you're
You
in.
just never know. You just never know what things prepare you for. It's
Exactly.
true.
And you are the founding executive director of Equality Florida. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. That was
And
20 years now or more?
it was 1997 that we became Equality Florida, but we'd actually existed uh, as a local organization for 4 years before that. And so we morphed into this statewide group because the need for we formed first to pass a human rights ordinance, and it was in a moment, Anita Bryant had done her thing. Miami had repealed its human rights ordinance. So this was the first big push after all of that. Uh, and it sparked other cities and other communities to begin to pursue local human rights ordinances. And then it became clear that there was nobody in Tallahassee. There had been a group and it had disbanded. And so we made a commitment in 97 that we would be in Tallahassee every year, that all of the candidates who made promises to us and asked for our vote, we'd hold them accountable. And so we've kept that promise, and we've blocked all the bad legislation, anti-LGBT, legislation, either blocked it completely or took the teeth out of it so that it did our community no harm. So that's been the important work that I have been dedicated to for decades now. But before that, when I was in college, just, you never know what life has in store for you. But I ended up seeing, this is of course before the internet, before email and all of that, there would be flyers and then there'd be a phone number, they like fringe at the bottom, you could tear the number off. And they were looking for people to go to Europe for the formation of a LGBT, I'm sure it said gay rights youth group. I bet it didn't say L. I bet it didn't say B.
Exactly.
And I remember my roommate and I thought, hey, possible free trip to Europe. Why not? So we called, we applied, we got accepted. We went as part of the American delegation. But for me, it was such an awakening because whatever my, even if my motive initially had not been, I want to be part of the vanguard of LGBTQ, liberation internationally. I just lesson after lesson. We had a meeting in Germany, and American soldiers roughed up our guys, and this was just at a window of time when 24-hour printing of pictures was happening, and so people who were there took pictures, got them developed, and then tracked us down so we had pictures of our guys being manhandled by American soldiers. And within 48 hours of that, there was a huge demonstration in the middle of the biggest square in Berlin before the wall fell. And so for me, what I was dealing with was when they came back, when these young men came back, in their teens and early 20s, to say what had happened, my initial thought was, yeah, that's what happens. You got to be careful out there. You can't be holding hands or, and everyone around us was like, this is an outrage. You call the American embassy. And I'm thinking, wait, when did I learn to just accept that as the normal way of things?
Yeah.
Where did I learn that I have to hide? And if I don't hide successfully, whatever harm comes to me is my fault. So it began sort of a cascading awakening of how much of the homophobic poison I had ingested.
In yourself, yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And that was back in the 80s, I would think, then.
Yeah, so that was 87, 88.
Right. 'Cause I saw a picture of you from 1990. I think that was a big march or something, but you had been at it again, from the time you got out of
Yeah.
high school. Right.
Yeah, so from there to the March on Washington in 93, and then from that to Equality Florida. So it's been, just an ever expanding, I think part of what's drawn me to it is that, it sits at the intersection of all of the things you're not supposed to talk about, religion, politics, sex, you know, you can't address the bias and the discrimination and the violence directed at our community without addressing how those three things impact us.
Yes, and you're right there in the middle of it. And so I wonder, about how you continue to not only survive and cope, but you also thrive in it. You remain a vibrant leader. So what are some of the things that allow you to do that?
Well, today I'll agree with you. 3 days ago, I might have said, I don't know whether I'm thriving, but I think that, as corny as this sounds, I'm not fueled by anger. It's a spice. It's in there. It's in the stew at different times. But I think of my ancestors and I think of the things they endured, and to make it possible for me to even exist. And so the stresses and the strains of this work compared to that just feel, I try to keep the larger perspective. The next piece is that I honestly think to myself, I want to be the adult that I wish had been there for me when I was a kid. I want to be visible enough that, representation really does matter. I felt so incredibly isolated, so incredibly alone as a kid. And even when I knew that there was a gay community, it was overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male.
And that has been part of what keeps you moving forward in this, is you're being that person and you're being available and you're being visible even if you don't know what all
Yeah.
the implications are or the impacts. You're trusting that there's a ripple effect
Yeah.
of all the work that you do. I mean,
Yeah.
we could name some of the very specific things that you know you had an indicator on, and you know that you push that forward and those things. But there's so
Right.
much that leadership does that we don't get a chance to see, right? And I looked at
Yeah.
your profile and I was studying you a little bit and said, what does she say about her religion? And I just loved what you wrote. You said, if people are hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them some water. If they need shelter, give them a home. And if they're cold, give them something. So that's pretty
Yeah.
practical and straightforward. It's something that I completely resonate with. It's like, it's not anything. It's not a faith. It's not believing in something greater if you're not doing anything with the hands that you've been given. And you are certainly doing a lot with the hands that you've been given. And I am so grateful for you. I would
Well,
like to ask one more question, if that's all right.
sure. Sure.
Just any signs of hope that you see in the world, because we know all the signs of
Oh,
disaster
yeah.
emerging.
Well, actually, the same things are the signs of hope. There was there's a speaker who said maybe the darkness that's surrounding us isn't the end of things. Maybe it is the darkness of the womb, that a new America is being born. And I really do believe that it is in these uh, times when it is easy to see um, what is broken, what is harmful, that we begin to imagine what what's on the other side of it. So, for example, I'll just use this as sort of a metaphor. Marriage equality. There were years when, I mean, I think it was 38 states in a row where we lost and lost badly. 60 plus percent of Floridians voted against marriage equality. Um, and I remember walking around after that because Barack Obama had won the presidency, which was cause for celebration. But at the same time, I remember walking down my street and thinking 6 out of 10 of my neighbors just said, you don't get to have what we have, and so carrying that, but it was a necessary part of a process. What we saw in the aftermath of every state was that there was an immediate surge in support for marriage. It was as if there'd been sort of this sort of a people looked around and thought, what have we done? But I do think that this is the surfacing of things that we have known to be. We didn't suddenly. Police brutality is not new. Mass incarceration is not suddenly new. Racism, structural and ongoing racism is not new, but we are talking about it in a way where we are not using code. We're not pretending we don't see what we see or know what we know. And I think that we're living in a moment when the demographic shift in America means we will not be a majority white country. We will be a multiracial country. And that this election that has put everything in stark relief is a game-changing moment for America. We will be a multiracial, equitable society, or we will have chaos. And that is the only question in front of Americans right now.
Beautiful. And you have hope that
I do.
we'll
I do
choose
have hope.
well. Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Oh,
And
thank you.
continue to enjoy your beautiful journey with your family.
I will. I will. You take care.
Thanks.